Hello and welcome once again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are
the FAIRtax Guys.
Again, dedicated to the proposition that we need the fair tax here in this country for a variety of reasons. And we certainly hope that you were able to hear the interview that Randy Fisher did with Ted Yoho. It's program number 14. If you're going to look for that on SoundCloud or YouTube, check that out, number 14. A lot of good information from Congressman Yoho last time around.
Yeah, especially Randy's first question when he asked him, about how much does the fair tax come up in Congress, and to put it in a few words, Congressman Yoho said just about every discussion of tax reform or economy, fair tax comes up. That was very gratifying for us to hear.
Yeah, and it was also good to hear that Congress does pay attention to social media, or at least the staff does. Maybe a lot of the Congress people themselves don't have time to keep up with things, but their staff do indeed keep up with Twitter and Facebook and PopVox. So if you want to influence your congressmen and senators, that's a good way to do it.
Yep, absolutely. We've mentioned PopVox before, POPVOX.com. You get on there, you subscribe, you just give them your name and address so they know what congressional district you're in, and then you can weigh in on any pending legislation, anything that's dear to your heart, and give your pros or cons and why fors. So it's a great website to go to. And, of course, the FAIRtax Guys are on Facebook. Just look for the FAIRtax Guys. And
SoundCloud.
Yep, and we're on SoundCloud. You can download our programs or listen to them on SoundCloud, which is audio only, or on YouTube, which is audio and video.
Well, given that we have faces made for radio, the audio only works really well for us, don't you think?
Yeah, on the YouTube part, I usually have pictures of other people like Congressman Yoho and so forth instead of us.
All right, well, let's get back into what we were talking about here on FAIRtax Power Radio, and that is a comparison between the current income tax, the fair tax, and the flat tax. And just to back up a little bit, since we've been off of this for the last little bit, the biggest difference is the Internal Revenue Service, that $12 billion monster that runs roughshod over the Constitution. That is a product, of course, of the current income tax. The flat tax will keep that. But the fair tax gets rid of it.
That's right. The IRS will not be needed under the fair tax because the fair tax is a consumption tax. You pay for it at the cash register, not the crash register, or when you write a check to, service a plumber or your accountant or whatever. Although you won't need many accountant scores after when the fair tax is. So the fair tax is a consumption tax. We don't need the IRS. It goes away, and all the nonsense that we put up with the IRS, that goes away too.
The Internal Revenue Service being running roughshod, as we've mentioned, over the taxpayer's Bill of Rights, but it has been used as a political weapon by both sides for almost as long as it's existed. And you dug up something here that you want to, that I found with a rather interesting little fact here that we can share.
Yeah, this was originally in USA Today. They're talking about, yes, the IRS has admitted to political targeting, and they promised to fix the problem, but guess what? They haven't.
Well, as soon as the TV cameras are off, it's going to be business as usual. We all know that.
As troubling as this is, it says here, we have seen this before. The tax regulation of all nonprofit advocacy groups has not had a happy history. One pattern repeats. Congress passes a law, often to score short-term political points. The IRS then interprets the law aggressively against groups it considers controversial, and then the federal courts may soften the blow by case, but eventually Congress passes yet another law, and the cycle starts all over again. But one sentence that really jumped out at me. The IRS announced in 1919, yes, almost 100 years ago, 1919, that if a group disseminated, quote, controversial or partisan propaganda, end quote, it could not be exempt and donations were not deductible. First off, who considers what's controversial and partisan propaganda? All right.
Yeah, that's the problem. The IRS is the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And if they accuse you of doing something wrong, they're the ones that get to decide if your defense is sufficient or not. Not exactly a fair level playing field.
Yeah, as Bob said, the Bill of Rights goes out the window as far as the IRS is concerned. And that's why in this comparison sheet, the category on taxpayer rights is so important. We have talked about this quite a bit. But with the current income tax, tax code requires massive disclosure, record keeping, individual audits, and collection activities that were where constitutional protections yield. Say that again, Bob.
Oh, you want me to read that again for you?
Yeah.
It says the current tax code as it is requires massive disclosure. I mean, we've mentioned this before. You have got to tell the government intimate details about your personal finances, more than you're willing to tell your own kids.
Yep.
The government needs to know more about your finances than you're comfortable telling your own kids. Massive record keeping. You got to save all these kind of receipts. Individual audits, collection activities continue, and so constitutional protections just have to get out of the way because they do not apply when the IRS comes after you. Look out, buddy! You are in the crosshairs.
Yeah. How did we let that happen? All right. And we did. We as the people, the voters, we let this happen. We've got to take it back.
Yeah, we're going to try something here a little bit on a future program. What Thomas Jefferson might think if he were to come back today and see exactly what the government is doing to the people.
Yeah. That's going to be interesting because there was an article written about that.
We're going to have
for another
Thomas
day.
Jefferson this thing here. But then the taxpayers' rights, the IRS will tell you that they've got this bill of taxpayers' rights, but they are still the judge, jury, and executioner to decide what rights you get.
Yeah,
and they very rarely will rule against themselves.
Oh, what a surprise.
But under the fair tax, all of that goes away.
That's right.
Taxpayer rights, we don't have to worry about it because we no longer have this monstrous federal agency sticking its tentacles into our personal lives in every possible way. It's just gone. The IRS is gone with a fair tax.
And as it says on this comparison sheet, which, by the way, you can find on fairtax.org, under the fair tax, as the Founding Fathers intended, the fair tax does not directly tax individuals and privacy rights are preserved. It's very simple. It's very simple. You are taxed on what you choose to spend, and that's completely anonymous. Nobody has to know. Nobody cares. You spend it. And if you're a person of great means and you spend a lot, you pay more. And if you're just getting by, you pay less. So it's very simple. And it's again, anonymous. No rights are violated.
Yeah, because again, with the fair tax, it is, as I say, completely anonymous. It is a sales tax. You pay at the cash register when you buy things. End of discussion. So the merchants know how much they collect, but they don't know who they collect it from. They don't care who they collect it from. It's just as anonymous as the state sales taxes that just about everybody, I think 45 of the 50 states have state sales taxes, so people are intimately familiar with that. The states are not poking their nose into your personal finances to run their governments. Why should the federal government do it?
Yep, that's right. So, like Bob says, they're already doing it. It would not be a big stretch for them to enact the fair tax.
And if we're talking about taxpayer rights under the flat tax, really not a whole lot of change from what we've got now because the IRS would continue to exist.
That's right. It still has to there'll be the same number of collection points, meaning us, the public, the individuals, that will still have to pay tax. It may be simpler, but we still have to pay tax. We still have to record our income and stuff like that, which really is nobody else's business. So the IRS will still be there. There could be individual audits, and the collection activities continue. And in another section here, we'll talk about the sustainability of this thing.
But I'll tell you what, taxpayer rights, that should be something, doesn't regard what your political ideology is, what party affiliation you've got. As a tax-paying American, you want your rights protected, and the IRS just flat won't do it.
Yeah, that's right. And we really need to get around this.
And it needs to go away, and the only way that it's going to go away is to pass the fair tax.
That's real tax reform, not nibbling around the edges, not just passing a law, patting yourself on the back and say you've done something. Real tax reform is with the fair tax. Get rid of the income tax, rip it out by the roots, tell the IRS bye-bye, and let's put in a very simple consumption tax.
Yeah, and you've got to know that the tax code that we have now at this very moment is exactly the one that the politicians want us to have. They're in control of it, and they will rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, pat themselves on the back for making meaningful reform, and go right back to business as usual if we, the people, let them get away with it.
Yeah.
That is why it is so important that you stand up and be counted. as someone who supports the fair tax, and you can do that by joining AFFT. Let's take a little side note here on that one as well.
Yep.
But Americans for Fair Taxation, that's the national grassroots organization that represents the fair tax, and we need as much representation, as much membership in that organization as we can get if we're going to have any political clout and get this thing done.
Yeah, we send people up to Washington once a month. They're up there for 3 or 4 days, talking to Congress people and their staffers and so forth. We just got another co-sponsor last week, Scott Garrett from New Jersey. And it's through the efforts of these folks that go to Washington on a regular basis, and they need to be able to tell the folks in Washington, we have X number of millions of members of the AFFT. So we can't emphasize this too much. Please become a member of the AFFT. It's for as little as $10 per year. Or if you care to join the 1040 Club, in which you donate $10.40 a month, that what you donate is up to you. But it's really critical, your donations and your membership, and try to get everybody in your family to become a member too. It would really help us out.
And again, if you go back and listen to program 14 of FairTax Power Radio, you can hear Ted Yoho talking about that, just how important it is. He mentioned 46,000 different pieces of legislation that Congress people have to consider. And if you're not up there, the squeaky wheel syndrome, if you're not up there making noise, you're not going to get noticed. So we have got to have a huge membership in AFFT, and if you're not already there, you need to be there, and you need to be there now.
Yep, that's right. And by the way, we seem to be doing an ad, but Bob and I are just doing this because we like to do this, all right? Nobody pays for this program. This is all done free. Yes, it is an ad because it's something we feel passionate about. We want it for our children and our grandchildren.
All right, let's move on a little bit and pick up another subject that is just near and dear to a lot of people's hearts, especially us old folks, and that's Social Security and Medicare. You have heard a lot of people tell you, inaccurately, and you don't know whether they're just intentionally misrepresenting the truth or they're just ignorant and don't really know the difference. But the fair tax does get rid of the payroll taxes that support Social Security and Medicare. Now, that's the FICA thing you'll see on your paycheck, and also a Medicare payroll deduction. But the fact that the fair tax gets rid of those taxes, some people will take that a step forward and say, oh, guess what? The fair tax abolishes Social Security and Medicare. Absolutely, totally wrong.
Yeah.
Social Security and Medicare are put on a much stronger financial footing with the fair tax than they are with the current income tax.
Because right now, it's labor that supports Social Security and Medicare. Labor foots the bill with a highly regressive 15.3 payroll tax on wages up to $118,500. And Medicare, it continues with a 2.9% Medicare tax up to, there is no up to limit. I mean, for whatever you make. So now the 15.3 comes from the fact that you pay 7.65% and your employer pays 7.65% FICA tax on the first $118,500. That's a very regressive tax. Now, what about the folks that we talked about this before? What about the folks that don't draw a salary? They don't, go to work on a daily basis. They don't draw a paycheck. They have investments. Wealthy people. All right. Well, they don't pay anything towards Social Security. They don't support Social Security and Medicare. So Social Security and Medicare is supported only by people's labor. When you tax labor, you get less of it. All right, it's not a good idea. It's very regressive. It hurts the people at the lower end more than anybody else. We need to get rid of it. Under the fair tax, well, let's see. What does it say here? A portion of the tax is dedicated to funding Social Security based on the total wages and current payroll tax rates. Well, in other words, every time somebody makes a purchase in this country, a portion of the fair tax collected must go to Social Security and Medicare. So that means every purchase that's registered in this country will be partially supporting Medicare and Social Security. As Bob has said before, it broadens out the base. Instead of, I think there's 140 million taxpayers, you can have everybody. Even a child that goes and pays for, buys a pack of gum. everybody will be supporting Social Security and Medicare. And those wonderful visitors that come in from afar to go to Disney World and Universal Studios, et cetera, and so forth, they're going to help us pay. So it's a good situation under the fair tax. It will support Social Security and Medicare much better than it's being supported right now.
Yeah, this is a point that you've got to catch on. You've got to get this through your head, that currently Social Security and Medicare, financed through payroll taxes, means only people who are on a payroll somewhere are going to be supporting those two programs. With the fair tax, the tax base is expanded to everybody who buys things. Or more accurately, everybody who makes retail purchases over and above the poverty level, because you're spending up to the poverty level. You do not pay any fair tax on that. That part, the fair tax you pay on that spending, is reimbursed back to you, so you don't take a dime out of your pocket until your spending exceeds the poverty level. But once your spending exceeds the poverty level, it doesn't matter whether you're working for wages, whether you're working for a salary, whether you are living off investments, whether you're living off an inheritance, or you're living off lottery winnings or whatever. When you buy things, you will pay the fair tax, and when you pay the fair tax, you are supporting Social Security and Medicare. It is in the bill. Anybody that tries to tell you that the fair tax abolishes those programs clearly hasn't read the bill. And we can turn and show you right there, book, chapter, and verse, where the fair tax earmarks funding at the same level it's currently receiving for Social Security and Medicare. It's just expanded to a much broader tax base. It is a much better system, and we've just got to have it.
Let's think of the fair tax as an equal opportunity tax system. It doesn't care if you're a legal resident, an illegal resident, a visitor to this country, whatever, somebody from Mars. It doesn't make any difference. If you're making a purchase, you're contributing towards the fair tax, which means you're contributing towards Social Security and Medicare. It's an equal opportunity tax system.
Oh, absolutely. And it's just got to be here. We've just simply got to have it. It's that simple. Because the sustainability of the current income tax is pretty close to zero. I mean, you're not going to find too many people who think that the 73,000 plus pages that we've got of tax code and all of the regulations and court rulings that define it and flesh it out a bit, nobody understands the current tax code. It was written by congressmen for the benefit of lobbyists that have lots of campaign cash to go around. And the economists now are waking up to the fact that the system we have got now is just so complex, it is just not sustainable. Something has got to be done with it.
Now, on this comparison sheet, under the current income tax for sustainability and feasibility, it says lawmakers, policymakers, economists, and taxpayers agree that the current system is a monstrosity held in place by an intricate web of special interest groups and must be replaced. It cannot go on like this. It's going to get more and more complicated, and until the point that it breaks down totally. At some point, people are really going to rebel against this thing.
You know, what's interesting, though, is this thing says changes are adopted every year. Truth of the matter, they're adopted every day.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Literally,
it's almost daily.
There have been more changes to the tax code over the past decade than there have been days in the past decade.
Yeah, that 46,000 figure that Congressman Yoho mentioned. Mm-hmm. Oh, I wonder how many of those pertain to the tax code. Maybe I don't want to know, but anyways.
Yeah, the 46,000 pieces of legislation that come through every year, that still amazes me. And again, if you haven't heard the interview with Congressman Yoho that Randy Fisher did, definitely look that up. It's program number 14. Listen to it and really absorb what's being said there, because that's the voice of the guys that we have to get a hold of. Yep. Get their ears, and thankfully Congressman Yoho is strongly supportive of the fair tax. And I say he makes some good points on how we, the people, can influence the rest of us. So if your congressman and your senators are not supporters of the fair tax, Congressman Yoho gives you some pretty good ammunition on how you can get through to them.
And again, you can find these programs on YouTube. Just look do a search for the FAIRtax Guys, and on SoundCloud.com. Again, do a search for the FAIRtax Guys. Okay, under the fair tax for sustainability and feasibility, once enacted, taxes must be raised on every consumer in the U.S. to change the base. All right. Well, yeah, every consumer. That means when you go to the store, you're a consumer.
Yeah, that's the fair part. The same rate applies to everybody. And the current income tax rate, oh, mercy. Most of those 73,000 pages are exemptions that somebody gets or breaks that somebody gets that somebody else doesn't get. Doesn't happen with a fair tax.
What a mess. But, sales tax, well, the states have used sales tax for over 60 years, 60. And they are in effect in 45 of the 50 states. The tax can be collected in conjunction with the state sales taxes. No big deal. No, it's not going to be a huge startup effort.
That's one of the things. We say the IRS goes away, and people say, well, who's in the federal government is going to collect the tax? Well, nobody.
Yeah.
It's going to be collected by the states using the same collection mechanisms, using the same enforcement mechanisms that the states are already using to enforce and collect their state sales taxes. They'll just collect the fair tax right along with it and would remit that to a very small agency within the Treasury Department that would be receiving the funds. And then from that point, it goes out like it was. But we will no longer need a huge $12 billion federal agency to collect the taxes. The states are going to do it. They've been doing it for decades, and they've been doing it well, and that's the way we need to go with this thing.
Yep. And let's see, the last column here, for sustainability and feasibility under the flat tax, it's something that Bob and I have said for months now. The flat tax just won't stay flat. We know this. President Reagan flattened it out in the 80s, I think 86 and so forth, and since then they have added 40,000 pages of regulations, tax regulations, income tax regulations. It's just crazy.
Yeah, and it started out flat, and like less than 1% of the population when the income tax was first implemented was actually affected by it. It was, when it started out, what they said it was going to be, a very small tax on a very elite group of people. But in less than 30 years after the income tax came into being in 1913, the government was saying, we need your money so bad we're going to take it from you out of your paycheck before you get a hold of it. So you talk about it, what's the word, a monstrosity as far as evolution just going out of control. The income tax has a history of doing that, and if you do not understand your history, you are doomed to repeat it. A flat tax is not the answer. It won't stay flat. It keeps the IRS, and it will. I've always thought that if they did have this flat tax, that's just hitting the reset button. All the favors that the lobbyists have paid for over the years are wiped out, and the congressmen get to sell the same favors over again. So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of them are in favor of the flat tax. That is not going to stay flat.
Yeah, we got to stop the cycle. We got to break the cycle, put in something that's very simple and cannot be corrupted, and that's the fair tax.
Oh, you got it. So again, one more time, the sustainability of the current income tax system is pretty close to zero.
Yeah.
The sustainability of the fair tax is going to be forever because we've seen it work in the states. We've seen it work in the states and a lot of the states, we didn't mention this, have got balanced budgets using simply their sales tax. Because a lot of state constitutions demand that there be a balanced budget, and I guess the debate over whether that should happen at the federal level is a debate for another day. But it has been proven that sales taxes can support a balanced budget.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And I saw this on Facebook a while ago. The 9 states with the highest income taxes compared to the 9 states that exist by sales tax and no income tax. Well, the sales tax states, their economies are improving at twice the rate as the 9 states with the highest income tax. That tells you something.
We're lucky. Florida is one of those states that has no personal income tax, so we've got a little bit of personal familiarity with this.
Yeah.
And, of course, Florida also is dependent a lot on tourism, so the downturns in economy seem to have an impact on us that might not be quite as profound as in other places. But Florida has a large economy.
Yeah.
Funded almost entirely by sales taxes. Of course, the counties and all get property taxes and things like that.
Right.
But anonymous, the state of Florida has no idea how much money I make, where I make it, or anything of the like. I just support them when I buy stuff at the cash register. That model works. It is sustainable, and it needs to be implemented at the federal level.
Yep. It's extremely simple, and I think its simplicity is its beauty.
It is. And again, if we want to see this happen, again, listen to what Congressman Yoho had to say on Program 14. Go back and listen to that. Get involved. That's one of the things that if silence is just implicit contentment with what's going on right now, if you want to see something happen and you don't stand up and actively campaign for it, it ain't going to happen. So again, we need you to join Americans for Fair Taxation. www.fairtax.org is the website. There's a little join link up there at the top of it. You can join at any membership level that you want, from as little as $5 a year. If you can do the 1040 Club, $10.40 a month, that would be nice. We do need a little bit of finances on that one, but more than that, we need membership in that organization so that when we, the Fair Tax volunteers that go up to Washington and try to horse collar folks like Ted Yoho and other congressmen and explain to them why we need the Fair Tax, if we can't represent a large number of people, they just ain't going to pay us any attention.
Yep. And the fact that you're listening to this program now, thank you. Thank you very much. Please spread the word. Please let other people know. Bob and I believe that this is an easy way to learn about the fair tax. We put out these programs periodically. They're about a half hour long, and it's just a simple way. You can listen to it, well, like I listen to them while I'm mowing the lawn and stuff like that. It's a good way to do it. So we're hoping that we put out some valuable information and that you'll feel like telling other people about it, and they'll tell other people about it, so we can get the ball rolling here and get this passed.
So you can hear us on SoundCloud.com. It's free for the listeners to look up the FAIRtax Guys on SoundCloud. You can find us on YouTube. You can also find us on Facebook, the FAIRtax Guys. We have a Facebook page. We would certainly appreciate it if you would go in and like us a little bit and tell your friends all about it, because, again, this has got to be a grassroots effort from we the people to get the politicians' attention, because they're the ones whose minds we're going to have to change in order to get the fair tax in place, and we need all the help we can get doing that.
And don't forget FairtaxNation.com, another group of volunteers. It's not a formal group like the Americans for Fair Taxation, but it is an informational group, you might say. People from all political stripes are members of FairtaxNation.com. A good source of information, something that you might be interested in taking a look at their website and signing up for their updates, because they're pretty good about sending out information. So that's another source of information. And we've already mentioned PopVox. Another one, a similar one, is Congress.gov. I've signed up on Congress.gov. I get notices from them whenever there's a new co-sponsor. I've asked them to let me know on H.R. 25 and S-155, the fair tax version in the Senate. Let me know when there's a new co-sponsor, and sure enough, they send an email each time. So there's lots of places to keep yourself informed about the most thoroughly researched tax reform proposal ever presented to Congress.
It is over $20 million worth of privately funded research, by the way.
That's right. Nobody
from the government has any skin in this game, because it was designed in the private sector. The only tax reform proposal that has no politician's fingerprints on it. Of course, once it became a congressional bill, then folks did have to line up and support it or not. But it was designed and built outside the government with $20 million plus of privately funded research, saying that it will work as advertised, despite what some of the naysayers will say. So go to PopVox, register your opinion. Your Congress people are indeed listening to that, and it is important. POPVOX.com.
Okay, so
we're just about done here for another edition. Man, time does fly when you're having fun, doesn't it?
Good heavens, I can't believe it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I tell you what, it does. And so, again, we invite you to listen to Fair Tax Power Radio. Tell your friends, family, and others about it on SoundCloud and YouTube. Until we meet again, we are the Fair Tax Guys. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
Reminding you that the fair tax, once you understand it,
you'll demand it.